Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It's nice to see you all. Some familiar faces, some new faces. As you mentioned, my name is Jennifer Green. I'm an associate professor here at NASCAD and the creator of a project called the Black Snowmobile Project. Over the last several years, I've been pretty fascinated and obsessed, I guess you could call it, with flax, which we can see here, some dried flax, which is the plant source for linen. And as I've been researching this topic from the perspective of a craftsperson, I'm a weaver and a spinner, I've been quite engaged in the question of how can we create a local textiles industry. And as you can imagine, in some ways it might seem quite simple. We need to begin with farmers who can grow the fiber. And then we need to work with manufacturers who can extract the fiber, weave the cloth. And then we need to work with designers, fashion designers who can come up with a desirable product that we can wear. And as I've been working with people along the textile supply chain here in Nova Scotia, we've isolated what we think is one of our biggest challenges. They're just some images of the growing. And that is that global supply of textile materials has displaced the local production of fibers and cloth. And we call this a wicked problem. Some of you have probably experienced or worked with wicked problems in your line of work. And we see this as the wicked problem that is facing Nova Scotia and the redevelopment of the local textile industry. And in order to face this wicked problem and try to work through it, we've come across a design approach, design methodology, you could call it, called transition design. It is a design methodology that was put forward by two professors at Carnegie Mellon in the States. They have to wicked problems that involve community and trying to understand the complexity in to be able to mentions satisfy all aspects of the. So I thought we could have an activity instead of kind of lecturing about what transition design is and how we've been applying it. I thought we could engage in this activity together, if you're so willing. So I know that you're not farmers. You're probably not invested in whether we have a local textile supply chain here in the Maritimes or not. But you are all involved in it. I can see that you're all wearing clothing when you left the house tonight. You're consumers or researchers or academics or designers yourself. And so for that reason, your input and your thinking on this subject is just as valuable as mine. So I'd like to work through this challenge of the global supply of textile materials has displaced the local production of fiber and cloth together. So I'm going to ask you to maybe just close your eyes or give yourself a minute to focus. And I'd like you to just spend a few minutes imagining the potential for local cloth and local clothing. I'll just give you a few seconds to think about that. And now as you're imagining this, if you could ask yourself the question, what would be hindering? What is hindering the development of local textiles? And there might be a few ideas coming into your mind, but if you could try to encapsulate it in one thought, one idea, one sentence, and just hold on to that idea. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes, and I'd like you to share that one sentence with the room. It's really important in transition design that we kind of parse, kind of untangle these complex issues into a single idea. So there's many ideas, but we'll probably gather that from all the people in the room. So you can open your eyes, lift your head, and maybe we can just start and just kind of shout out the one thing that was coming to your mind. Oh, that's
For me, it was infrastructure.
For me, it's global trends.
Trends, yeah.
I was thinking high production costs. I was thinking, what is a natural plant? Where the plant is fitting into the racial class.
Right, is the environment adequate to support the plants? Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that in the broader range too, so we're on the same wavelength. How do other creatures, pollinators and animals fit into this? So environmental sustainability. The same, I just thought about the climate.
Can the climate sustain it?
I thought about awareness, who was aware of the project or the ability to participate.
Perhaps the lack of a local market for what would probably have to be a premium local. Just trade.
Global trade.
When I come up with those comfort.
As in, will the products be comfortable?
Not just that, but just where we are right now, we're comfortable with the way we do things. And disrupting that.
So does the farming have to happen in rural areas? Can it happen in urban farms?
I guess I looked at competition with like passion and how, you know, local trends have so many people well into that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking something similar of like how used we are like to extracting resources from other countries and like we want to do that here.
So, or identity.
Yes.
How we define it.
How does clothing fit into identity? Yeah.
I feel quite shallow now, but the first thing I thought of is how often I need to iron linen clothing. I think linen's great, it's just I find that it needs to be ironed a lot, that's all.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm shallow, but
I'm thinking of the shortage of trained engineer design and designers and machine operators.
Maybe we'll just do one circle around the
So the first few things that I thought of have already been said, so as everyone's going through, I'm kind of trying to think of something that hasn't been said, and I think one thing is maybe differentiation. Like what else is already out there and how can what you're doing compete or move past what?
I thought that it was kind of comment, but from the scale, but not if it is locally produced. That scale, but then what's the cost there?
I'm surprised this nobody brought this up, and so maybe I'm thinking on the wrong dimension already, but I think it's consumerism and it's a systemic way of looking at how we acquire clothing, the, the mindset associated with that.
Yeah, I'm a little bit like Sam, I was thinking about scale.
I was thinking about machinery support and labor cost.
I was thinking about how you can really create demand for the resources needed to produce clothing and how can that scale from like a backyard sort of environmental service to larger scale farm.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for participating. And as you can see, just from a few voices in the room, it is quite a complex problem. And we've been, again, as I said, we've been looking at this through a transition design methodology. And so we've been trying to identify how all of these ideas, challenges that you're bringing up fit into this methodology. And so we're looking at how these challenges arise across societal sectors. So we looked at 5 societal sectors: social, infrastructure and technology, political and legal, economic and business, and environmental. And even just from the responses in the room, we heard people talk about, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the skilled labor to support the industry? We heard people talking about environmental concerns. How is the plant going to respond to climate change? Do we have an ecology to support the growth of the plant? We heard questions about economics and business. What is an appropriate scale for Nova Scotia? Can we have a market that can meet the high cost of production? We heard political and legal. What about global trade? And social. So how do we change consumerism? How do we change people's buying habits from going out and being able to buy something for $5 that's lasts them 2 weeks and they get something new? And so, very aligned with some of what you shared in the room. We've worked with 84 people along the textile supply chain in Nova Scotia, in rural areas, and in Halifax. And we've come up with our kind of list of 34 key challenges that we're facing. And the main goal in doing that is that by unpacking and understanding the complexity of the problem, to design interventions to address the difficulties of the problem. Maybe we'll leave it. Thank you for participating in a bit of a wicked problem mapping and wicked problem conversation. And
May I ask the first question? So I like that that you didn't shy away from this complex problem, and I know also that it probably was not easy to find your way in, but maybe you can tell us a little bit how when did it say click and you knew, okay, this is what you have to do, step 1, step 2.
I think it was actually a former design professor at NASPAD who said, you're talking about this, have you heard of transition design as an approach? And I think when we read about transition design, the methodology, everything clicked. It was like, we've been working at this problem now since 2012, and we didn't have a way to navigate the complexities. We didn't have a way to engage farmers and processors who have been sheep shearers their whole life and are struggling with their employment. And so, our project isn't just about flax, it's about kind of textiles generally. But I think it really gave us a way to engage with people who care deeply about this work and try to gather a large amount of data in a responsible way and in a way that we can work with, and we have a kind of approach to reviewing the data.
Thank you. Anybody else? They have a microphone.
Just wondering, is flax native to Nova Scotia, and has there been a flax industry here before, or agriculture?
Flax is a crop that came through colonization, so it started being grown around the mid 1700s. It was there are indigenous varieties of flax, wild flax, but they haven't been cultivated to an extent that could, kind of be commercialized.
And when the colonizers came, did they have like a system of
Yes.
growing flax?
We grew flax across all counties in Nova Scotia, and we produced over 100,000 yards of cloth annually by hand, just domestic production. Much of that was flax, but wool as well. Flax or linen and wool.
Anybody else?
So walk me about wrinkles. I was just curious, did Stanfields in Nova Scotia, did they use flax or what?
As far as I know, they never used flax. They used a lot of wool from local farms.
Okay, that makes sense.
They are part of our research project now. They're one of the partners on our project. They are keen to try to incorporate linen if they can.
Cool. Thank you. Hey, hi. First of all, thank you for the presentation. The idea of transition design approach is really interesting. So I had one question. When you did the research, when you spoke to local farmers, what was their primary motivation to get involved into this?
I think a lot of farmers feel very passionately about local food and being able to help with food insecurity, being able to ensure there's knowledge and cultivation of food crops locally. So a lot of farmers were excited about the potential of also growing local clothing, local fiber. There's potential for new markets or diversifying their crop, but I think at the heart, I would say like the key interest was about a kind of belief in the value of local.
Talk about what transition design is. Like, what is transition design?
Yeah, I guess so. Transition design was developed by Terry Irwin and Gideon Vossoff at Carnegie Mellon. And underlying transition design is the belief that societies need to transition to more sustainable futures. And in order to do that, we have to unpack the kind of complex challenges that are preventing us from advancing into sustainable futures. And so they like to say transition design is an approach, not a methodology. We've used it as our central methodology. So, but essentially they're both communication designers, and so they propose a way of engaging with community to ask questions that are quite specific, to then map and visualize data to give back to the community, and then this idea of ecologies of interventions. It takes a lot from systems thinking, systems design, but it's in a specific kind of sustainability lens.
So the way I'm imagining, just listening to you, is that there is a system that needs to transition. That system is highly complex and it involves all those categories that you described earlier. And the challenge is to facilitate that transition.
Exactly. When we try to tackle wicked problems, we think one thing is the issue, infrastructure. We don't have We don't have a wool scouring facility, that's why we don't have a textile industry. You know, you'll talk to so many farmers and that's what they say. But to actually be able to unpack and understand, well, we don't have a scouring industry because we're a colonized country. We didn't have infrastructure developed here, like there's historical roots to that, there's social reasons, environmental reasons, all contributing. So the goal of using a transition design approach is to really kind of unpack and take a systems view of the issue, of each of the individual issues, and to kind of understand it from all of those perspectives that are feeding the perpetuating.
Last. That'd be good. I don't know how to word it yet, but it's a lot of, soy. You've grown them, you can do multiple things. You can with them, make milk with them, you can make with them. Versatility is there. And I'm curious if through your research, if finding alternate uses of flax, not just for textiles, but like what other uses for it does it have? I know it comes outside of what you were initially looking at it from, but does that help create more justification for the transition to happen in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting you mentioned soybeans because we use soybeans to help fix dye onto linen. So good transition there. But our project's really looking at the whole, the entire plant. And the long line fiber is about 10% of the plant. Another 10% comes from the short fibers,